All right, welcome to the Dazed and Apologized podcast, where we help you navigate culture's questions with faith and reason. We are so excited that you've tuned into this episode. With each episode of this podcast, what we're going to do is take a common question posed by society, by culture, by the masses that usually deal with an issue or an objection people have to Christianity. And then we're going to help you navigate how to answer those questions with confidence, with faith, and with reason. And that's important because we're not going to get into a lot of details. We are going to dive into the weeds a little bit with some things, but our goal here is to help you have conversations with people. So your neighbors who have these questions, your coworkers, your family, hopefully even your kids that have these questions, you will be able to have the conversations. And then through those conversations, hopefully be able to share the gospel as you explain your faith and the confidence and the reason that you have for what you believe. So today we're going to jump right in. We're going to begin at the beginning. Probably the most important question that you'll ever get asked about the faith is about God. How do you know God exists? How can you be sure there is a God? Now, before we even attempt to answer that, there's a couple of things we need to establish. First, there is no way to prove with 100% certainty the existence of God. We have to lay that out there from the beginning. That is not possible. Now, this should not come as a surprise to us because actually, we don't have 100% certainty about anything in life. Do we have 100% certainty that love exists? Or how about friendship? Or do you have 100% certainty that when you get in your car today after work and you put the key in the ignition and you turn the crank that it's not going to blow up? Do you have 100% certainty that when you go to bed tonight, your spouse is not going to get up in the middle of the night, go to the kitchen, get a steak knife and stab you with it? No, we don't. We don't operate with 100% certainty in anything. What we do, this is important, we operate on probability. What is the most likely thing to happen? What is the most likely thing to happen when I put my key in the ignition and turn the crank? Most likely, my car is going to crank. It's not going to blow up. And in fact, if I thought it was going to blow up, I wouldn't get in it. So we operate in life on probability. What is the most reasonable explanation for something? I believe love exists because I can feel and see its effects. My wife, she cares for me. She sacrifices for me. She cooks for me. She buys me things. She wants to spend time with me. These are arguments or defenses for her love for me. And so because of these things, I can't actually see love. I see the effects of love. But because of that, I believe that love exists. And so it is with God. So what we have to do, we have to look at what is the most reasonable explanation for reality. As we look around and see and experience the world around us, what best explains it? Is it a random assortment of random things that happen to come together randomly in perfect sequence and logic? Or is it more reasonable to suggest that there's an intelligent designer? So I'm getting ahead of myself, but what we're going to do is we're going to divide the podcast into two parts. The first part, we're going to explain some things. We're going to do some teaching time, and that will get a little bit in the weeds, but bear with me because the second part is when we talk about how to have a conversation with someone. When someone asks you the question, does God exist? How can you be sure there's a God? We're going to talk about how to have that conversation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through briefly, and I do mean briefly. There are seminary classes, there's books taught on these. I'm going to briefly go through the main arguments for the existence of God. And then the last one, I'm going to slow down because it is the one I think is the most helpful for having a conversation. So first, we have the cosmological argument for the existence of God. So the cosmological argument is based on the universal assumption of cause and effect. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. So let's stop here and explain briefly. Now, the other night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I walked into the kitchen to get something to drink. It was pitch black dark in my house. And as I walked through my living room, I stepped on some scissors. And then I slipped on some pieces of paper that were on the floor. And then I stepped on a crayon and smushed it into the hardwood. Now, if I asked you, why is all this stuff here? What happened? How did all this get here? And your answer was, no reason. It just happened by itself. I wouldn't believe you. That's not a very reasonable explanation for why things exist because of the universal law of cause and effect. It's much more reasonable and rational to believe that something put it there. that something happened, that there was a reason, a cause that scissors and crayons and pieces of paper and all that junk was laying on my living room floor. In fact, it was Mother's Day the day before, and my kids were making their mom a card. And so they had pieces of paper cut up like confetti, scissors, construction paper, glue sticks, all this stuff all over the floor. So that's in a nutshell what we're looking at. Why is all this stuff here? Well, there had to be a cause. There had to be a reason for the stuff that exists in the world. Now, this was made famous by the philosopher Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. He proposed that God was the first causer, the ultimate causer of everything that happens. And Paul has this in mind in Romans 1:20 when he speaks of God's invisible attributes that are clearly seen through the creation of the world. Okay, so that is a brief explanation of the cosmological argument. Now, second, the teleological argument. Now, teleology is similar to the cosmological argument, but it studies the purpose or the design of something. Now, this was made popular in 1802 by English philosopher William Paley, who used the watchmaker analogy. Many of you have heard this before. It's pretty simple. Imagine you're walking along a field and you come across a rock. You pick it up and you look at it. Well, you probably wouldn't think much of it. After all, it's just a rock. But let's say you keep going and you come across a watch. You pick up the watch and you look at it. You see its complexity. You see all the parts moving inside of it. You would logically conclude that the watch was designed, right? There is no way, logically or rationally, that you would just assume this was a random act or an accident, a product of random formation. So in the same way, when you look at the world around you, right, you see the structure and the order, the balance, the consistency, the pattern that is intrinsic to life in this world. Take the human body, for example. The complexity of the human body, how I can touch a hot stove, and within milliseconds, my brain says, that's hot, remove your hand. That is amazing. And so it's much more reasonable to conclude that things that are designed, that have a complexity and an order and a structure are intentionally designed by a creator, by a designer, instead of just a random accident. So this is the teleological argument. Third, this is one of my favorites. And this one, I think the first two people think about all the time. This one, not a lot of people think about. It's the argument from desire. Now, this is based on two premises. And the first one is, for every natural, innate desire that we have, there exists a corresponding object which can satisfy that desire. So C.S. Lewis made this famous in his book, Mere Christianity. And he said it like this: creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. For example, a baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desires. Well, there is such a thing as sex. So the first premise is simply that our natural desires point to the existence of the satisfaction for those desires. And then the second premise, and this is where I think it gets fascinating, is that we all have inside of us a desire that nothing on this earth can satisfy. So think about this. You ever been in a conversation with somebody and they make a comment like, oh, I just want to leave the world a better place. Or I just want to be a better dad. I want to give my kids a better life than I had. All of these comments point to this idea that inside of us, inside of every human being, is this desire to be better. We all want to be better. I want to be a better dad tomorrow than I am today. I want to be a better husband tomorrow than I am today. Even if I have a good day, or even if I think I'm a good dad, I still want to be a good dad tomorrow. I want that to continue. We see this with athletes all the time. When a basketball player has a really good game, let's say he makes 50% of his shots, which is a really good game. He shoots 10 times, he makes 5 of the shots. If you talk to him after the game, he's not going to be thinking about the 5 that he made. He's going to be thinking about the 5 that he missed, and how next game he wants to be better and make 6 shots or 7 shots or 8 shots. Or even if he made all 10 of his shots, if you talk to him, he's going to be thinking about the next game and how next game he also wants to make 10 of 10. We all have this desire to be better. We have a desire for satisfaction, which is ultimately a desire for perfection. We want to be perfect. We want to look perfect. We want to feel perfect. We want to act perfect. We want to be perfect moms and dads. We have this desire to be perfectly satisfied and perfectly happy. Now, back to the argument. Because we have this desire for perfection, this desire for satisfaction, and yet we observe and acknowledge that nothing on this earth can satisfy us, Lewis draws the conclusion that logically, we have to understand that we were made for another world. That this earth, this broken, sinful world is not our home. This is not where we belong. We belong where true satisfaction and where perfection exists, which is heaven, which is with God. And so that, in a nutshell, is the argument from desire. Now, all of those are the more, popular and the common arguments for the existence of God. And all of them certainly can and should be used when you're having conversations with neighbors, with friends, and with coworkers. The second one, however, the teleological argument, is particularly good with kids. So parents out there, I want you to pay close attention to that one. One of my kids asked me this just recently during one of our times of family worship. She said, how do we know there's a God? It's a great question, by the way. Phenomenal question for a kid to ask. If your kids ask that, don't get mad. Appreciate the fact that they're asking questions and they want to know. But my wife and I appealed to the teleological argument to answer the question. We pulled up some pictures on our phone of beautiful paintings, the Mona Lisa, Starry Night, Thomas Kincaid stuff. We pulled these up and we took a minute to look at the beauty of these paintings, how the colors matched and the shapes and the design. And it was just so, so beautiful. And then we asked our kids, we said, what is more likely to be true? That this painting was an accident? That somehow these colors just happened to fall on the painting in such a way that it created that beautiful picture, or that the wind happened to blow and blew the color onto the canvas and in such a perfect way that it created the Mona Lisa, or it created Starry Night, or it created this beautiful landscape. Is that more likely, or is it more likely that there was a painter? That there was someone who conceived of the idea and then executed the idea intentionally? Which one is more rational? And obviously, even little kids can see the nonsensical nature of the atheistic point of view, that everything is just random and everything happened by accident with no designer or a creator. It's obvious. It's common sense to say, yeah, there's a painter. How else could you explain it? So the teleological argument, parents, is really, really good with kids. But of course, it can be used for anybody. But my favorite argument for the existence of God is the fourth one, and it's called the moral argument. Now, Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, wrote a book that became extremely popular in apologetic circles called A Critique of Pure Reason. And in it, he said this, quote, "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and reverence. First, the starry heavens above me, and second, the moral law within me." Now, the idea of this moral law inside of us was also popularized by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. The first 4 chapters of that book actually deal with the moral argument. And here's 2 of the points that Lewis makes. Number 1, there is a universal moral law. There is a sense of right and wrong that everybody has. And everybody is expected to know it, non-Christian or Christian. It doesn't matter. Atheist or theist. It doesn't matter. Old or young. Everybody is expected to know this, and then everybody is expected to live by it. So Lewis kind of talks about how if you just overhear normal, everyday conversations with people, you hear things like this. Well, that's not fair. Or, leave him alone. He's not bothering you. I say that to my kids all the time. Leave him alone. He's not bothering you. Or, hey, I gave you some of my food. You should give me some of yours. Or, hey, you promised you would do that. You should do it. Now, what interests me, Lewis says, about all these arguments is that the man who makes them, or all these statements, the man who makes them is not simply saying what you're doing does not please me or make me happy. He is appealing to some sort of standard of behavior, which he expects everyone to know about and live by. Now, what I find interesting is how true this is. I've traveled all over the world. I've been to dozens of countries. I've been blessed to experience lots of different societies and cultures, and all of them, even the most atheistic and godless and pagan places that I've seen or been, have some sort of a moral code which they live by. Now, sure, in some cases it may be slightly different than mine or different than America's moral code, but by and large, they are very, very similar. Selfishness is never admired. Selfishness is never something that people want to be known as, or cowardice is never rewarded. Bravery and courage is always held in high regard. Lying is always bad. I could go on and on and on and on and on. There is a moral rightness. There's a standard that everybody seeks to live by. And then the second premise of the argument is this: if there is a universal moral law, there must be a universal moral law giver, which is just common sense. If we didn't create this law, but it exists, then where did it come from? So logic demands that there must be a lawgiver. There must be someone who created this moral law. And I don't want to get into the weeds here, but if you don't have a moral lawgiver, if you don't have someone who is your first unmoved mover, as Aristotle calls it, then it's an infinite regress. You just regress back to nothing, which is a logical impossibility. Which is, by the way, how you answer the question, who designed the designer or who created God? My youngest daughter asks this question all the time, and the answer is no one. Because if someone created God, then that person would be God because they would naturally be higher than God. So you have to go back to an uncreated creator. You have to go back to an unmoved mover, to a first cause, which is God. Now, the reason I like this argument so much is because it comes up in conversation all the time. Because everybody has things in which they think is wrong. So I'll be in a conversation with somebody, I'll be in a meeting with somebody, and someone will say, why do you believe in God? How do you know God exists? And I usually begin to answer the question by saying, tell me something that's wrong. Tell me something that you think is wrong. And this is what you can do when you're in a conversation with this. When somebody asks you this question, ask them back. Ask them another question as an answer and say, tell me anything in this world that you think is wrong. Anything. I don't care what it is. Just tell me something. And I've gotten all kinds of answers: murder, rape, child abuse, sex trafficking, lying, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the great thing about this, it doesn't matter what they say. The simple fact that they believe something is wrong is all you need to have the conversation. So for example, let's say they answer murder. That's a common one. I get that all the time. I believe murder is wrong. Okay. Why do you believe murder is wrong? Where does that come from? And then they might say, well, because life is valuable. I get that a lot. Well, life is valuable. We shouldn't kill life. Okay. Well, you could ask them, why is life valuable? Where does that come from? Why do you believe that? And then they might say, I've gotten this. Well, because each person has gifts and abilities that can be used to make the world a better place, for example. There's lots of things you could ask there. You could say, well, why do you believe people have gifts and abilities? Where does that come from? Or why do you want the world to be a better place? Why does the world need to be a better place? Why is it a good thing that the world is a better place? Now, I could keep going, but you see my point. I'm going back and back and back. Why? Where does that belief come from? What is the explanation for that belief? And what you're doing is you're trying to get them to go back to something, to a standard. What are they laying against their beliefs to say this is right or this is wrong? Where does their sense of right or wrong come from? And usually, if you can engage folks in this way, you're going to stump them. Now, that's not the goal, to stump them, but you're going to get them to see the dissonance or the incongruence of what they believe. They probably haven't thought through where their beliefs come from. They probably haven't thought through why they believe something is right and something is wrong. And then that is when you lovingly and gently and kindly give them your answer. And that is because we were created by God in his image. And the God of the universe is a loving God. He's good, he's holy, he's righteous, and he is just. So he is the perfection that we strive for. He is the perfect standard of righteousness that we appeal to when we say something is wrong or something is right or something is fair or something is unfair. And then prayerfully, you can be confident when you speak of God, when you speak of the gospel, with folks. And hopefully this is helpful to you as you think about how to have a conversation and how to engage with people about the existence of God. You can use any of the arguments above, and there's a lot more of them. My goal here was just to give you a brief overview of some of the main ones and then help you to be able to have a conversation with people with confidence and faith and reason about the existence of God. So thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next week as we tackle another really important question that has to do with the Bible. So God bless and thanks for watching.